that Google doesn't work with the Chinese military. That answer was deceptive because Google works with many of the entities that work with the Chinese military in common collaboration. And just as one example would be Tsinghua University, where Jeff Dean, who is the head of Google AI, served on the Computer Science Advisory Committee for the university, and then the university takes nearly $15 million from China's Central Military Commission. So you can see how even if you don't literally show up at the offices of the Chinese military, if you're all showing up at the same place, working together on AI, that would lead to my concern. But I want to talk about search because that's an area where I know Google has real market dominance. On December 11th, you testified to the Judiciary Committee, and in response to a question from my colleague Zoe Lofgren about search, you said, "We don't manually intervene on any particular search result." But leaked memos obtained by the Daily Caller show that that isn't true. In fact, those memos were altered December 3rd, just a week before your testimony, and they describe a deceptive news blacklist and a process for developing that blacklist approved by Ben Gomes, who leads search with your company, and also something called a fringe ranking, which seems to beg the question, who gets to decide what's fringe? And in your answer, you said to Ms. Lofgren that there is no manual intervention of search. That was your testimony. And now I'm going to cite specifically from this memo from the Daily Caller. It says that the Daily Caller obtained from your company. It says the beginning of the workflow starts when a website is placed on a watch list. It continues, this watch list is maintained and stored by Eris with access restricted to policy and enforcement specialists. Sort of does beg the question who these enforcement specialists are. Access to the listing can also be shared on a need-to-know basis to enforce or enrich the policy violations. The investigation of the watch list is done in the tool Athena, the Ares manual review tool. So you said to Congresswoman Lofgren that there was no manual review tool, and then your documents indicate that there is a manual review tool. So help us understand the inconsistency.
He lied. There are two parts to this. In general, we algorithmically approach our search results. We have robust policies to do so, and we tested both with user feedback and we use raters to validate. Last year alone, we ran over 300,000 experiments and launched around 3,000 improvements to search. And we don't manually tune. The question last time was in the context of, is there someone behind the curtain manually tuning an individual search result? We don't. We generally approach it algorithmically. We, however, in order to comply with the law in every country,
you do it manually, or you have a
there may be
bot
an actor or a website identified as interfering in elections, and we then have to put that site on a list so that doesn't appear in our search results against queries. So other examples would be violent extremism.
And is that done manually, Mr. Pichai? That process you described, is that done manually?
And we could get reports from law enforcement agencies. We are complying with, or it's a known DMCA-based.
There is either a manual component or there is not a manual component. Which is it?
For creating those lists, that process can involve manual portions.
Okay, great. Well, that is sort of the concern that I have. You've now said something different today than you said to Ms. Lofgren, because you've confessed that there is a manual component to the way in which you blacklist content. And it seems to be no coincidence that it's sites like Gateway Pundit, The Western Journal, American Spectator, Daily Caller, and Breitbart that receive the ire or the negative treatment as a consequence of your manual tooling. And it also seems noteworthy that whistleblowers at your own company have spoken out. You said that one of the reasons you maintain this manual tool is to stop election interference. I believe it is in fact your company that is engaging in election interference, and it's not just my view. Mike Wacker came out and was a whistleblower indicating that the manual blacklist targets that Google specifically goes after are those who support President Trump, who hold a conservative viewpoint, and he left your company in 2019 because he was speaking out against these outrage mobs. So can you see how when you empower individuals, some of the same individuals that Project Veritas has exposed as labeling people as terrorists who say make America great again or who support the president, that in fact can be the very election interference that we're concerned about, and that you're using your market dominance in search to accomplish that election interference?
And they're talking about Russia.
With respect, I strongly disagree with that characterization. We don't approach this work with any political viewpoint.
Yes, you
We
do.
do that to comply with law, known copyright violations, very in narrow circumstances, and we have to do that to comply with the law. And in many cases,
But you're not
those
complying
requests
with the
can't
law.
come from law enforcement agencies.
Your
and
own
legal
employees are
institutions.
saying you're doing it for a different reason. Your own employees are saying it's political bias. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr.
And I'm sorry, may I be recognized for unanimous consent request?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just given the productivity of our discussion, I'd request that we be permitted a third round of questioning.
Without objection, I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
The asshole.
Yeah. You know, the documents prove it. The
No,
news
it's a
and
myth.
journalism
They're
industry
not
in this country are an economic
messing up
freefall.
stuff
Over
in
200 counties
Portland,
in America
Oregon.
no
That's a
longer have a
myth.
local newspaper.
They tearing
And
shit
tens
up.
of
And this
thousands
dude
of
said it's a
journalists have
myth.
been
It's
laid off
not
in
true.
recent years. The reason journalism is in freefall is that Google and Facebook now capture the vast majority of digital ad revenue. Although news publishers produce valuable content, it is Google and Facebook that increasingly profit off their content. Publishers have told us that Google and Facebook maintain their dominance in these markets in part through anti-competitive conduct, as well as conflict of interest. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2015, Facebook reported high and quickly growing rates of video viewership on its platform. Based on these metrics, news publishers fired hundreds of journalists, choosing instead to boost their video division. In 2018, it was discovered that Facebook had inflated these metrics and had known about the inaccuracies several years before Facebook publicly disclosed this. Mr. Zuckerberg, did you know that these metrics were inflated before they were publicly released?
Congressman, no, I did not, and we regret that mistake and have
That's
put in
not a
place a
mistake.
number of
How
other
you don't know
measures
about your
since then to
company?
make sure that we.
And you realize the harm that this caused journalists across the country?
Congressman, I certainly know how important it is that the metrics that we report are accurate, and we've put in place additional measures to make
accurate.
sure that
They're not trying to make
those.
sure.
And what do you have to say?
They want to make sure it's accurate. Yet when we post some shit that's accurate, we get put in Facebook
Congressman,
jail.
I disagree with that characterization and also your description of what.
Reclaiming my time, Google, meanwhile, maintains its dominance in part through aggregating data from across its products and services. Mr. Pichai, I understand that Google collects user data on users' browsing activity through its Chrome browser. Does Google use that data for its own purposes, either in advertising or to develop and refine its algorithms?
Mr. Chairman, we do use data to improve our products and services for our users. Anytime we do it, we believe in giving users choice, control, and transparency.
You're using
we make it very
algorithms.
clear, and we give them simplified settings to choose how they like the data.
And so you do use the data that you get from these companies for your purposes.
My understanding was whether we use data in general to improve our products and services, and we do use data to show ads, but we give users a choice. They can turn ads personalization on or off.
Now this obviously, the use of this data from all these companies gives you a tremendous advantage over them and over any competitor. Does the ability to make money in any way affect Google's algorithm in terms of what news appears in a typical user's search results?
Yep.
The way we rank our search results, we don't take into account commercial relationship that we have.
Okay. But Facebook and Google have gravely threatened journalism in the United States. Reporters have been fired, local newspapers have been shut down, and now we hear that Google and Facebook are making money over what news they let the American people see. This is a very dangerous situation. And unfortunately, my time has expired and I have to yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to pick up where I left off. Mr. Pachai, there are rioting groups that are going unchecked with the posting of what I would contend is very violent video. Yet yesterday I was sent a YouTube video about doctors discussing hydrochloroquine and discussing the not dangerous of children returning to school. And when I clicked on the link, it was taken down. And then I was sent a different link on YouTube, and it was taken down. I just checked again just to make sure, and it says that this video has been removed for violating YouTube's community guidelines.
Right.
How can doctors giving their opinion on a drug that they think is effective for the treatment of COVID-19 and doctors who think it's appropriate for children to return back to school violate YouTube's community guidelines when all of these videos of violence is all posted on YouTube?
Booyah.
Congressman, we believe in freedom of expression, and there is a lot of debate on YouTube about effective ways to deal with COVID. We allow robust debate, but in the area during a pandemic, we look to local health authorities. So, for example, in the US, it would be CDC for guidelines around medical misinformation in a narrow way, which could cause harm in the real world. And so, for example, if there is aspects of a video, and if it explicitly states something could be a proven cure, and that doesn't meet CDC guidelines, it's
free expression of speech, and you have these doctors who are giving their opinion as doctors, and I don't understand why YouTube and therefore Google thinks it's appropriate to silence physicians and their opinion of what can help and cure people with COVID-19. I'm going to switch quickly to Mr. Zuckerberg. I think at this point it's fairly obvious that technology platforms have been stifling conservative news and opinions. You employ a panel of content moderators. Can you explain how Facebook chooses who these moderators are?
Thanks, Congressman. We do hire a lot of people around the world to work on safety and security. Our team is more than 30 or 35,000 people working on that now. We certainly try to do this in a way that is neutral to all viewpoints. We want to be a platform for all ideas. I don't think you build a social product with the goal of giving people a voice if you don't believe that people being able to express a wide variety of things is ultimately valuable for the world. And we try to make sure that our policies and our operations ultimately reflect and carry that out.
Is there an ideological diversity amongst the content moderators?
Yep.
Congressman, I don't think we choose to hire them on the basis of an ideology. They're hired all over the world. There's certainly a bunch in the U.S. There's diversity in where they're hired, but certainly we don't want to have any bias in what we do, and we wouldn't tolerate it if we discovered that.
So you don't specifically hire, say, conservative moderators and Democrat or liberal moderators so that there's a balance in your content moderators?
Congressman, in terms of the 30 to 35,000 people or more at this point who are doing safety and security review, that is correct. In terms of the people setting the policies, I think it is valuable to have people with a diversity of viewpoints involved so we can make sure that we have the different viewpoints represented in the policy development process.
Well, that goes back to the doctor.
We also consult with a number of outside groups whenever we develop new policies to make sure that we're taking into account
one thing, but
all
you sure cut her
perspectives.
shit off.
What are some of those outside groups that would be conservative leaning?
Congressman, I need to get back to you with a list of specific groups, but it would depend on what the topic is.
Can you just think of one? I mean, you said you reach out to outside groups. Can you think of one conservative outside group that you reach out to and use as a content moderator?
Nope.
Congressman, I'm talking about different external stakeholders and groups that are inputs to our policy development process. And I'm not involved in those conversations directly, so I would have to get back to you with specifics on that. But I'm quite confident that we speak with people across the ideological spectrum when we're developing our policies.
I would very much appreciate a follow-up on that. Real quickly, can you briefly explain the approval process for third-party fact checkers and how many fact checkers does Facebook employ?
Yes, thanks. We work with about 70 fact-checking partners around the world, and the goal of the program is to limit the distribution of viral hoaxes, so things that are clearly false, from getting a lot of distribution, but we don't ourselves want to be in the business of determining what is true and what is false. That feels like an inappropriate role for us to play.
But you do, though.
We rely on an organization called the Pointer Institute, and I think it's called the Independent Fact-Checking Organization, that has a set of guidelines of what makes an independent fact-checker, and they certify those fact-checkers, and then any organization that gets certification from that group is qualified to be a fact-checking partner within Facebook.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I'm going to recognize Mr. Johnson.